The Queen Bee. Two kings' sons once went out in search of adventures and fell into a wild, disorderly way of living, so that they never came home again. The youngest, who was called Simpleton, set out to seek his brothers, but when at length he found them, they mocked him for thinking that he with his simplicity could get through the world, when they too could not make their way, and yet were so much cleverer. They all three travelled away together and came to an anthill. The two elder wanted to destroy it, to see the little ants creeping about in their terror and carrying the eggs away. But Simpleton said, "Leave the creatures in peace. I will not allow you to disturb them." Then they went onwards and came to a lake, on which a great number of ducks were swimming. The two brothers wanted to catch a couple and roast them, but Simpleton would not permit it, and said, "Leave the creatures in peace. I will not suffer you to kill them." At length they came to a bee's nest, in which there was so much honey that it ran out the trunk of the tree where it was. The two wanted to make a fire beneath the tree and suffocate the bees in order to take away the honey, but Simpleton again stopped them and said, "Leave the creatures in peace. I will not allow you to burn them." At length the three brothers arrived at a castle where stone horses were standing in the stables, and no human being was to be seen, and they went through all the holes until, quiet at the end, they came to a door in which were 3 locks. In the middle of the door, however, there was a little pane through which they could see into the room. Then they saw a little grey man who was sitting at a table. They called him once, twice, but he did not hear. At last they called him for the 3rd time, when he got up, opened the locks, and came out. He said nothing, however, but conducted them to a handsomely spread table, and when they had eaten and drank, he took each of them to a bedroom. Next morning the little grey man came to the eldest, beckoned to him, and conducted him to a stone table, on which were inscribed 3 tasks, by the performance of which the castle could be delivered from enchantment. The first was that in the forest, beneath the moss, lay the princess's pearls, 1,000 in number, which must be picked up, and if by sunset one single pearl was missing, he who had looked for them would be turned into stone. The oldest went thither and sought the whole day, but when it came to an end, he only had found 100, and was written on the table came true, and he was turned into stone. Next day the second brother undertook the adventure, but it did not fare much better with him than with the eldest. He did not find more than 200 pearls, and was changed to stone. At last it was Simpleton's turn to seek in the moss, but it was so difficult for him to find the pearls, and he got on so slowly that he seated himself on stone and wept. And while he was thus sitting, the king of the ants, whose life he had once saved, came with 5,000 ants, and before long the little creatures had got all the pearls together, and laid them in a heap. The second task, however, was to fetch out the lake the key of the king's daughter's bedchamber. When Simpleton came to the lake, the ducks which he had saved swam up to him, dived down, and brought the key out of the water. But the third task was the most difficult. From amongst the 3 sleeping daughters of the king was the youngest and dearest to be sought out. They, however, resembled each other exactly, and were only to be distinguished by their having eaten different sweetmeats before they fell asleep. The eldest a bit of sugar, the second a little syrup, and the youngest a spoonful of honey. Then the queen of the bees, whom Simpleton had protected from the fire, came and tasted the lips of all 3, and at last she remained sitting on the mouth which had eaten honey, and thus the king's son recognized the right princess. Then the enchantment was at an end. Everything was delivered from sleep, and those who had been turned to stone received once more their natural forms. Simpleton married the youngest and sweetest princess, and after her father's death became king, and his 2 brothers received the 2 other sisters. My little bunyips, that is all from Mr. Villain today. Liking the video and subscribing to the channel helps tell YouTube that you're liking my content and want to see more of it. Clicking the notification bell will keep you up to date with my videos and notify you whenever I upload. You can also dislike the video if you want, but doing that might be hazardous to your health. There was once a king's son who was seized with the desire to travel about the world, and took no one with him but a faithful servant. One day he came to a great forest, and when darkness overtook him, he could find no shelter, and knew not where to pass the night. Then he saw a girl who was going towards a small house, and when he came nearer, he saw that the maiden was young and beautiful. He spoke to her and said, "Dear child, can I and my servant find shelter for the night in the little house?" "Oh yes," said the girl in a sad voice. "That you certainly can, but I do not advise you to venture it. Do not go in." "Why not?" asked the king's son. The maiden sighed and said, "My stepmother practices wicked arts. She is ill disposed towards strangers." Then he saw very well that he had come to the house of a witch, but it was dark and he could not go further, and also was not afraid. He entered. The old woman was sitting in an armchair by the fire, and looked at the stranger with her red eyes. "Good evening," growled she, and pretended to be quite friendly. "Take a seat and rest yourselves." She fanned the fire, on which she was cooking something in a small pot. The daughter warned the two to be prudent, to eat nothing and drink nothing, for the old woman brewed evil drinks. They slept quietly until morning, when they were making ready for their departure, and the king's son was already seated on his horse. The old woman said, "Stop a moment, I will first hand you a parting draught." While she fetched it, the king's son rode away, and the servant who had to buckle his saddle tight was the only one present when the wicked witch came with the drink. "Take that to your master," she said. But at that instant the glass broke and the poison spurted on the horse, and it was so strong that the animal immediately fell down dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened, but as he did not want to leave his saddle behind, he ran back to fetch it. When he came to the dead horse, however, a raven was already sitting on it, devouring it. "Who knows whether we shall find anything better today," said the servant. So he killed the raven and took it with him. And now they journeyed onward, into the forest the whole day, but could not get out of it. By nightfall they found an inn and entered. The servant gave the raven to the innkeeper to prepare for supper. They had stumbled, however, on a den of murderers, and during the darkness 12 of those came, intending to kill the strangers and rob them. But before they set about this work, they sat down to supper, and the innkeeper and the witch sat down with them, and they together ate a dish of soup in which was cut up the flesh of the raven. Hardly had they swallowed a couple of mouthfuls before they all fell down dead, for the raven had communicated to them the poison from the horseflesh. There was no one else left in the house but the innkeeper's daughter, who was honest and had no part in their godless deeds. She opened all doors to the strangers and showed him the store of treasures, but the king's son said she might keep everything. He would have none of it, and rode onwards with his servant. After they had travelled about for a long time, they came to a town in which was a beautiful but proud princess, who had made it known that whoever should set her a riddle which she could not guess, that man should be her husband. But if she guessed it, his head must be cut off. She had 3 days to guess it in, but was so clever that she always found the answer to the riddle given her before the appointed time. 9 suitors had already perished in this manner, when the king's son arrived, and blinded by her great beauty, was willing to stake his life for it. Then he went to her, and laid his riddle before her. "What is this?" said he. "One slew none, and yet slew 12. She did not know what that was. She thought and thought, but she could not solve it. She opened her riddle books, but it was not in them. In short, her wisdom was at an end. As she did not know how to help herself, she ordered her maid to creep into the lord's sleeping chamber, and listen to his dreams, and thought that he would perhaps speak in his sleep and reveal the riddle. But the clever servant had placed himself in the bed instead of his master, and when the maid came here, he tore off from her the mantle in which she had wrapped herself, and chased her out with rods. The second night the king's daughter sent her maid in waiting, who was to see if she could succeed better in listening. But the servant took her mantle also away from her, and hunted her out with rods. Now the master believed himself safe for the 3rd night, and lay down in his own bed. Then came the princess herself, and she had put on a misty grey mantle, and she seated herself near him. And when she thought that he was asleep and dreaming, she spoke to him, and hoped that he would answer in his sleep, as many do. But he was awake, and understood and heard everything quite well. Then she asked, "One slew none, what is it?" He replied, "A raven which ate a dead and poisoned horse, and died of it." She inquired further, "And yet slew 12. What is that?" He answered, "That means 12 murderers who ate the raven and died of it." When she knew the answer to the riddle, she wanted to steal away, but he held her mantle so fast that she was forced to leave it behind her. Next morning, the king's daughter announced that she had guessed the riddle, and sent for the 12 judges and expounded it before them. But the youth begged for a hearing, and said, "She stole into my room in the night and questioned me. Otherwise she could not have discovered it." The judges said, "Bring us proof of this." Then there were 3 mantles brought thither by the servant, and when the judges saw the misty grey one, which the king's daughter usually wore, they said, "Let the mantle be embroidered with gold and silver, and then it will be your wedding mantle." And that is all for today's video, my little bunyips. Liking, disliking, sharing, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell is completely up to you. I hope you all sleep well tonight. Have sweet dreams. Good night. There was once upon a time an old goat who had 7 little kids and loved them with all the love of a mother for her children. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food, so she called all her 7 to her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest. Be on your guard against the wolf. If he comes in, he will devour you all, skin, hair, and everything. The wretch often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The children said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away without any anxiety." Then the old one bleated and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone knocked at the house door and called, "Open the door, dear children, your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little ones knew that it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You are the wolf." Then the wolf went away to a shopkeeper and brought himself a great lump of chalk, ate this, and made his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and called upon the door, "Dear children, your mother is here and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window, and the children saw them and cried, "We will not open the door. Our mother has not black feet like you. You are the wolf." Then the wolf ran to the baker and said, "I have hurt my feet. Rub some dough over them for me." And when the baker had rubbed his feet over, he ran to the miller and said, "Strew some white meal over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to deceive someone," and refused. But the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I will devour you." Then the miller was afraid and made his paws white for him. Truly, this was the way of mankind. So now the wretch went for the 3rd time to the house door, knocked at it and said, "Open the door for me, children. Your dear little mother has come home, and has brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little children cried, "First show us your paws, that we may know if you are our real mother." Then he put his paws in the window, and when the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all he said was true, and the door opened. But who should come in but the wolf? They were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One sprang under the table, the second into the bed, the third into the stove, the fourth into the kitchen, the fifth into the cupboard, the sixth under the washing bowl, and the 7th in the clock case. But the wolf found them all, and used no great ceremony. One after the other he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest, who was in the clock case, was the only one he did not find. When the wolf had satisfied his appetite, he took himself off, laid himself down under a tree in the green meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterwards the old goat came home again from the forest. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open. The table, chairs, and benches were thrown down. The washing bowl lay broken to pieces, and the quilts and pillows were pulled off the bed. She sought her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after another, but no one answered. At last, when she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I am in the clock case." She took the kid out, and it told her that the wolf had come and had eaten all the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length in her grief she went out, and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, there lay the wolf by the tree, and snored so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side, and saw that something was moving and struggling in his gorged belly. "Ah, heavens," she said, "is it possible that my poor children, whom he has swallowed down for his supper, can still be alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors, and a needle and thread, and the goat cut open the monster's stomach. And hardly had she make one cut, than one little kid thrust its head out, and when she cut further, all 6 sprung out after another, and were all still alive, and had suffered no injury whatsoever, for in his greediness the monster had swallowed them down whole. What rejoicing there was! They embraced their dear mother and jumped like a sailor at his wedding. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones, and we will fill the wicked beast's stomach with them, while he is still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones thither with all speed, and put as many of them into his stomach as they could get in. And the mother sewed him up again in the greatest haste, so that he was not aware of anything, and never once stirred. While the wolf at length had had his fill of sleep, he got on his legs, and as the stones in his stomach made him thirsty, he wanted to go to a well to drink. But when he began to walk and move about, the stones in his stomach knocked against each other and rattled. Then he cried, "What rumbles and tumbles against my poor bones? I thought 'twas 6 kids, but it feels like big stones." And when he got to the well, and stopped over the water to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and he had to drown miserably. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" and danced for joy round about the well with their mother. It happened that the cat met the fox in a forest, and as she thought to herself, "He is clever and full of experience, and much esteemed in the world," she spoke to him in a friendly way. "Good day, dear Mr. Fox. How are you? How is all with you? How are you getting on in these hard times?" The fox, full of all kinds of arrogance, looked at the cat from head to toe, and for a long time did not know whether he would give any answer or not. At last he said, "Oh, you wretched beard cleaner, you piebald fool, you hungry mouse hunter, what can you be thinking of? Have you the cheek to ask how I am getting on? What have you learnt? How many arts do you understand?" "I understand but one," replied the cat modestly. "What art is that?" asked the fox. "When the hounds are following me, I can spring into a tree and save myself." "Is that all?" said the fox. "I am master of 100 arts, and have into the bargain a sack full of cunning. You make me sorry for you. Come with me, I'll teach you how people get away from the hounds." Just then came a hunter with 4 dogs. The cat sprang nimbly up a tree and sat on top of it, where the branches and foliage quite concealed her. "Open your sack, Mr. Fox, open your sack," cried the cat to him. But the dogs had already seized him and were holding him fast. "Ah, Mr. Fox," cried the cat, "you with your 100 arts are left in the lurch. Had you been able to climb like me, you would not have lost your life." Once upon a time, there lived in a certain village a little country girl, the prettiest creature who was ever seen. Her mother was exceedingly fond of her, and her grandmother doted on her still more. This good woman had a little Red Riding Hood made for her. It suited the girl so extremely well that everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother, having made some cakes, said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how your grandmother is doing, for I hear she has been very ill. Take her a cake and this little pot of butter." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through the wood, she met with a wolf who had a very great mind to eat her up, but he dared not because of some woodcutters working nearby in the forest. He asked her where she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stay and talk to a wolf, said to him, "I am going to see my grandmother and carry her a cake and a little pot of butter from my mother." "Does she live far off?" said the wolf. "Oh, I say," answered Little Red Riding Hood, "it is beyond that mill you see there, at the first house in the village." "Well," said the wolf, "and I'll go and see her too. I'll go this way and go you that, and we shall see who will get there first." The wolf ran as fast as he could, taking the shortest path, and the little girl took a roundabout way, entertaining herself by gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and gathering bouquets of little flowers. It was not long before the wolf arrived at the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" "Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf, counterfeiting her voice, "who has brought you a cake and a little pot of butter, sent you by mother." The good grandmother, who was in bed because she was somewhat ill, cried out, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin and the door opened, and then he immediately fell upon the good woman and ate her up in a moment, for it had been more than 3 days since he had eaten. He then shut the door and got into the grandmother's bed, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who came some time after, and knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" Little Red Riding Hood, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was at first afraid, but believing her grandmother had a cold and was hoarse, answered, "It is your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood, who has brought you a cake and a little pot of butter mother sends you." The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her come in, said to her, hiding himself under the bedclothes, "Put the cake and the little pot of butter upon the stool and come get into bed with me." Little Red Riding Hood took off her clothes and got into bed. She was greatly amused to see how her grandmother looked in her nightclothes and said to her, "Grandmother, what big arms you have, all the better to hug you with, my dear." "Grandmother, what big legs you have, all the better to run with, my child." "Grandmother, what big ears you have, all the better to hear with, my child." "Grandmother, what big eyes you have, all the better to see you with, my child." "Grandmother, what big teeth you have, all the better to eat you up with." And saying these words, this wicked wolf fell upon Little Red Riding Hood and ate her all up. And that is all for today's video, my little bunyips. Liking, disliking, sharing, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell is completely up to you. I hope you all sleep well tonight. Have sweet dreams. Good night. There was once a little girl who was obstinate and inquisitive, and when her parents told her to do anything, she did not obey them. So how could she fare well? One day she said to her parents, "I have heard so much of Frau Trudy. I will go to her some day. People say that everything about her does look so strange, and that there are such odd things in her house, that I have become quite curious." Her parents absolutely forbade her and said Frau Trudy is a bad woman who does wicked things, and if you go to her, you are no longer our child. But the maiden did not let herself be turned aside by her parents' prohibition, and still went to Frau Trudy. And when she got to her, Frau Trudy said, "Why are you so pale?" "Ah," she replied, and her whole body trembled. "I have been so terrified at what I have seen." "What have you seen?" "I saw a black man on your steps. That was a collier. Then I saw a green man. That was a huntsman. And that I saw a blood-red man. That was a butcher." "Ah, Frau Trudy, I was terrified. I looked through the window and saw not you, but, as I verily believe, the devil himself with the head of fire." "Oh," said she, "then you have seen the witch in her proper costume. I have been waiting for you, and wanting you a long time already. You shall give me some light." Then she changed the girl into a block of wood and threw it into the fire, and when it was in full blaze, she sat down close to it and warmed herself by it and said, that shines bright for once in a way. And that is all for today's video, my little bunyips. Liking, disliking, sharing, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell is completely up to you. I hope you all sleep well tonight. Have sweet dreams. Good night. There was once a woman and her daughter who lived in a pretty garden with cabbages, and a little hare came into it, and during the winter time ate all the cabbages. Then says the mother to the daughter, "Go into the garden and chase the hare away." The girl says to the little hare, "Shh, shh, hare, you will be eating all our cabbages." Says the hare, "Come, maiden, and seat yourself on my little hare's tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The girl will not do it. The next day the hare comes again and eats the cabbages. Then says the mother to the daughter, "Go into the garden and drive the hare away." The girl says to the hare, "Shh, shh, little hare, you will be eating all the cabbages." The little hare says, "Maiden, seat yourself on my little hare tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The maiden refuses. The third day the hare comes again and eats the cabbages. On this the mother says to the daughter, "Go into the garden and hunt the hare away." Says the maiden, "Shh, shh, little hare, you will be eating all our cabbages." Says the little hare, "Come, maiden, seat yourself on my little hare's tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The girl seats herself on the little hare's tail, and then the hare takes her far away to his little hut, and says, "Now cook green cabbage and millet seed, and I will invite the wedding guests." Then all the wedding guests assembled. Who were the wedding guests? That I can tell you as another told it to me. They were all hares, and the crow was there as parson to marry the bride and groom bride, and the fox as clerk, and the altar was under the rainbow. The girl, however, was sad, for she was all alone. The little hare comes and says, "Open the doors, open the doors. The wedding guests are merry." The bride says nothing but weeps. The little hare goes away. The little hare comes back and says, "Take off the lid, take off the lid. The wedding guests are hungry." The bride again says nothing and weeps. The little hare goes away. The little hare comes back and says, "Take off the lid, take off the lid. The wedding guests are waiting." Then the bride says nothing and the hare goes away, but she dresses a straw doll in her clothes and gives her a spoon to stir with, and sets her by the pan with the millet seed and goes back to her mother. The little hare comes once more and says, "Take off the lid, take off the lid," and gets up and strikes the doll on the head so that her cap falls off. Then the little hare sees that it is not his bride and goes away and is sorrowful. And that is all for today's video, my little bunyips. Liking, disliking, sharing, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell is completely up to you. I hope you all sleep well tonight. Have sweet dreams. Good night.